Hello, everybody. Welcome to another fun and educational and exciting episode. We have a guest here who I met from speaking together at a summit, which was very fun. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Diane Mueller, ND and DAOM, is a seasoned sexual wellness authority, blending a strong educational foundation with a rich clinical and teaching experience. With a dual doctorate in naturopathic medicine and acupuncture and oriental medicine, Diane has illuminated the discourse on sexual health through her practice, MyLibidoDoc. Her personal journey through sexual health challenges has equipped her with a unique empathic lens, enriching her holistic approach to patient care. Diane extends her expertise through the Libido Lounge podcast, which we just recorded for, her online training institute, and by training medical professionals worldwide in functional medicine. So thank you so much for joining me, Diane. I'm very excited to have your super holistic doctor lens on libido today.
Thank you, Heather. I'm excited for another conversation with you.
I know. I'm like, let me just pick your brain. Yeah. And I actually also love that you put in your bio that like you have had your own personal experience with sexual health challenges, because I think so many people have, and it just normalizes it, you know, to just realize, oh, okay, she's an expert and she can still have challenges and work through them and, you know, get it and not judge me. So I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, you know, the thing is, it's like, even challenges, they come and go. Like one of the things that I just even went last month, I moved my home, and I was in a place that was moldy. That's happened to me before. I'm very well seasoned at understanding what to do in those scenarios, and I'm very reactive to mold. So I was not feeling very well, and moving and keeping up with my business and all the, you know, just the life things, feeling sick, feeling not well. Well, of course, my libido went down, right?
Yeah.
So like naturally, stress is high. I got a bazillion things on my mind. And so I think one of the things that I like to explain to people in relationship to what you just said is like most of us that are, you know, these seasons experts, like, you know, ourselves here, we typically do go through like highs and lows of it. It's not like, oh, we're in like the libido world, so like every moment and every day we're feeling super sexy, right? It's more around like this is part of the education and the teaching is like, yeah, like just like anything else in health and wellness, there's highs and lows, and how I worked through the past month with my partner was literally just like naming it and expressing to him, like, this is happening for me. This is not you.
Mm-hmm.
And having open dialogue around, hey, how can we, even though I'm feeling this way, how can we keep our connection? How can I still show up for you so that you feel like I'm still prioritizing you and you're still a priority, you know, to me and all of this. At the same time, how can I honor the fact that I'm just exhausted and I want to go to bed during this time for 10 hours a night, that sort of thing. And naming it, right, really, really helps take the pressure off, keeps the connection strong. And so, yeah, like you said, we all go through this, you know, just because I'm in this field does not mean I wake up every day and I'm like, oh yeah, today is another super sexy day. Like, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think the upside is maybe that like when our libido dips or when we're just not into it, we at least know why, and we at least like have a better understanding of what's going on. And that's kind of all I want for everyone listening, is just to understand the ups and downs and understand kind of what is in your control and what isn't. And I also kind of want to just point out that like what you said was so simple, but it actually takes some advanced skills and like a set of skills to be able to communicate like that. Like first you have to have the self-awareness and be like tapped in enough to your body during a stressful time of upheaval to realize what's going on. Then you need to be able to manage your emotions well enough to calmly and proactively share with your partner how you're feeling and to hold space for them when you're also going through a stressful time. So there's actually quite a lot there, even though you said it so simply. And so I kind of want people to understand, like, there's several different skill sets that you can work towards building to get to that point where you're like, okay, I'm kind of like managing this like a pro. It's not that it's not happening, but you can manage it like a pro. So that would be my 2 cents for that.
Like the season part as well. I think the other thing to comment on there is I think that's why it's important that all the techniques that that you and I teach throughout our work and our education, practicing these techniques in times where things are great. It's like, oh, when times are great and easy, like maybe it's not as important to name the up and down of like, maybe the small nuances day to day, because it's like, oh, this is so small. Maybe I feel a tiny bit off today, but I feel 98% good, right? But it's like the more I think we can practice in times where it's like, feel emotionally well, what I believe that does is we practice when it's easy so that we are prepared when it's hard.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think that's how we
and that's something I've been seeing with my clients recently too, where they start feeling better and they start feeling more sexually connected, and then they stop booking their sessions. And I'm like, no. We need to let's get a few months of continuous, awesome communication, sex, openness, self-awareness first, and then maybe we start kind of weaning off. But, and these were actually people who prepaid for their sessions too. So it's important to kind of keep going even when things are going well, especially.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. So, okay, let's back it up a little bit. Because we've talked a couple times, but I don't feel like I don't know a ton about your background. So how did you get into being a naturopath? And then how did you wind up with a libido specialty?
Yeah, it's a great questions. So many of us that wind up in, I think, anything in the alternative, holistic, however we want to, the non-traditional way of approaching health and wellness. So many of us have our own stories, and I actually ended up in naturopathic medicine due to a lot of physical stuff that was going on. It started as gastrointestinal distress and a lot of chronic IBS, chronic constipation, a lot of just discomfort, and lab tests were normal. So that's really how I ended up being a naturopath, as I was looking for lab tests are normal. Doctors are telling me normal. But yet one day I'm a size 6 and the next day I'm so bloated I'm a size 16. It was literally like that. And I was like, this is not normal. And yet everybody was telling me I was normal.
That's crazy.
Hence,
it
was insane. And so many people go through it. It was extreme. Yeah. It was it was a very, very extreme case of a combination of things, of different bacteria, different overgrowths of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, parasites, on and on and on and on. So, and it was an extreme thing to be told that was happening, and that I would lie awake in bed sometimes with pregnant belly, right? My belly would just swell so much. And with that amount of swelling, it would be wow, I could look pregnant overnight. And so obviously that's very painful because what's causing that? And, and then being told that, hey, your lab tests are normal. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. This is just your normal. No, that wasn't really good enough for me.
So sometimes when you're trying to seek help and something is wrong with your body, I've had that experience too. So that could be a whole other topic of medical gaslighting.
Yes, exactly the term I use. Medical gaslighting is exactly what it is. And, I think it's poor paradigm of medicine that we get into of oh, if we can't figure it out, it must be that it's in your head, versus maybe it needs to go see somebody else that can figure it out, right? So it's a very strange paradigm we're in that way. But that was the catalyst, right, that got me into holistic medicine and doing naturopathic doctorate school, as well as my Oriental doctorate, just because I was looking for information around I know this is not normal. And of course, in that program, I learned a lot. I found about a lot of other lab tests, and now I have wonderful digestion, and it's no longer a problem. Awesome. But yeah. And my interest in libido, I mean, honestly, it's kind of come throughout the years in waves. There was a lot of interest in it in my early 20s, where I started getting interested in the topic just from a standpoint of, I had a lot of, as I think a lot of people do, a lot of sexual shame. And, and some of it was how I was raised in a very religious type of scenario where, and then it's, it comes down to like sex education. I know you and I talked about this. I asked you this question on my podcast last week when we were talking, and some of the conversation we had around, starting with education at a young age, and the way that so many of us are educated is just like sex is for procreation,
Right.
and that's it. And so it's like experiencing pleasure. And then with my religious upbringing around, this really is just procreation. There was just so much shame. And then I remember meeting a friend, a very good friend in my early 20s, who was just very open about talking about sexuality and about her experience with self-pleasure. And it was just like mind blowing to me. And once I had like found this amazing human that could explain this other side of it, it really opened up. That was like kind of the first door for me of curiosity in this topic. And, and then through a ton of various things, anything from like sexual trauma and going through and surviving and recovering from a sexual assault, and, seeing like the numbness and the disconnection with my own body and all those things I had to recover from. So there was various things like that, these various things throughout life. And then the final component, truthfully, was going through divorce several years back. And that was like the final catalyst for me. I was like, oh yeah, I really need to focus on this, because my number one core value as a human being is connection. And what really the going through the divorce for me, it started me studying more relationship stuff and intimacy stuff from a standpoint of what actually keeps couples together. And one study that shows that the couples that report the happiest partnerships are people that have sex or, intimacy from a sexuality perspective, not necessarily intercourse, but they're intimate 50 times a year. So on average, once a week. And with our divorce rates and with the people I talk to in my community, it's like, that's not happening. And we're losing our connection. We're falling out of love. We're going through divorce. There's so much trauma and all that. So I feel like kind of the final piece that was like, oh yeah, I really need to make this a priority and help educate and support other humans this way, was that loss of connection through my own relationship.
So I love that you've gone through your own, I don't love that you had to go through an uncomfortable experience, but it sounds like I love that you learned so much from it, and that, you did all this research. And I'm curious, how does that affect how you approach things with clients?
Yeah, great question. The biggest thing is one, I think anytime we go through things, it helps make us more, compassionate and empathetic and all those, sorts of things. But like anything, I really feel like the other thing is just a good reminder of all the different root causes that go into
so
something
many
like
in this
libido,
area. It's
right?
so holistic.
It really is. And so many times it's like people say libido, and like when I tell people I'm a libido doc, like if I just meet people in the world, like, oh, so can you fix my hormones? So it's interesting to me, right? As soon as I say libido, and even I say this to other medical professionals, right? It's not just lay people that aren't in the field. It's even other medical professionals. The first thought they go to is hormones. And then it's interesting when I work with hormone specialists, and I have some hormone docs that refer to me, because they refer to me because they get it. They refer to me the person that's like, oh yeah, they fix their hormones. Their hormones are great. A lot of things get better. Hormones get regulated, but yet their libido doesn't turn back on. And people come in and they're like, well, my testosterone's normal. My estrogen's normal. Why don't I have libido still? And so, I think anytime we go through things, it's just, more lessons around like, oh yeah, all the different layers. And so we see all the different physical root causes. We see the hormones, we see all the vasculature, we see the neurological, the inflammatory. There's so many different physical things.
So much.
Right. It's so many. But then also, like, what is our relationship with ourselves? Are we really prioritizing our partner? Are we prioritizing time for a connection? And it's amazing to me that this is not talked about more, because we so much in health, we talk about things like, okay, you want to go to the gym? Put that on your schedule. When are you going to the gym?
Right.
And we put taking our kids places, and we put, okay, this is when dinner time is, and all these different things. We want to see our friends. That goes on the calendar. But when it comes to prioritizing time to really connect with oftentimes the main person in our life, it's oftentimes a thing that doesn't make it on the calendar.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And
like I've been feeling like there's just kind of an insanity that's going around. And I had somebody reply to me and say, "Oh, I don't think we're going to work with you. You know, it's expensive, or my husband doesn't want to. But and we have a vacation coming up. We have all the kids stuff this summer." And I was like, "Okay, so just to be clear, you're prioritizing your vacation and like your kids' soccer camp over saving your marriage." Okay, great.
Right.
You know, but I think you're right. It's like we don't think about it in those terms, and so it's just like life goes on and we just almost assume that relationship should just be there for us without nurturing it and prioritizing it.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing that so many of us talk about is this, you know, this schedule thing, right? Around like, okay, schedule sex, schedule intimacy, schedule date nights. And I think one of the things that like, there's a lot of pushback, I feel like, from people when we say that. And your example is like a perfect example of it. Because I think what happens is we think in our relationships, we shouldn't have to schedule this. It should just like spontaneously happen. And the way I like to orient people back is in the beginning when things are usually passionate and we are showing up for each other, we feel all these things. Well, we're not typically living together. We're not typically in a long-term relationship. And so we're scheduling things. So like what's interesting is we think scheduling is so strange to do because it should just happen spontaneously. But in the beginning, when things were awesome,
and you look forward to them, and so it was like fun to schedule them. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And then we begin together and we get closer, and then there's just this ease, and it's like, oh, I don't have to take time to schedule because I'm going to see this person all the time. But that's not real, you know, realistic. It's like when we're seeing each other, it's in passing, or it's, did you take out the trash, or who's going to get the groceries, or who's going to get the kids, versus like, oh, you know what? Friday night is our night. And maybe everything between now and Friday is these passing kind of conversations about the kids and the food and the grocery. But Friday night at 6 p.m., we have 4 hours where it is about us. And that's what we do. And then we stop doing it.
I think it's so true. And I think everything you just mentioned also highlights that you become roommates with someone. You maybe become co-parents with someone. Those tend to not be the sexiest roles. So if anything, there's more of a need to like set aside that time than when you're first dating.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have my big, comfy, like oversized sweatshirt that is just, I've had this sweatshirt since I was I think I got this sweatshirt at 14 years old, and I love it. I'm 44, so I've had this sweatshirt for a long time, right? This is like, it's like, it really is, but it's baggy and it's old, and it's one of those things that it's like not living with a partner, like they never even know about this sweatshirt. Well, then I'm having comfort and I'm living with my partner, and it's like, oh boy, here's the sweatshirt, right? And so when that kind of stuff starts happening, right, and we don't even think about the impact, it's not to say like, hey, living together, we can't have those days where it's like, I just need to put on the things and wear the things that are more about comfort than, you know, sex, of course. But it's so easy to just fall into that habit then of this is what I do all the time. And versus like, hey, what is my commitment to the gym? What is my commitment to like putting something on, you know, twice a week? You know, that's going to be just a little bit more visually appealing for my partner. You know, of course, if we have kids, we keep that in, you know, in mindfulness of them, but there's still ways we can still show up and look more visually appealing and look more attractive to our partner. You know, where's that point with the effort?
Right. It is. And I mean, also that effort, I think, pays off for ourselves and like how we perceive ourselves, because, and I think a lot of people saw this, you know, during the pandemic and having to stay at home. It's like, it can get depressing if you're just like, okay, I'm in my pajamas all day and I like haven't showered in a few days. And it's like, are you feeling sexy in that moment? Probably not, you know? So
yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't wear, you know, I work from home. I typically right now I'm barefoot, right? But some days I bring down from my closet, I bring down shoes that have high heels. And for 2 hours a day, I just put my high heels on. I'm sitting down, and I don't do it all day or every day, but just like something to get in that altered
Yeah.
state. And it's such a simple thing, but all these little tiny things. It's like the Atomic
I
Habits. Have you
have.
read
Yeah, I
any of
love
the
that.
Atomic Habits? Yeah. And it's like we go, I think exercise is probably the analogy I use the most since I'm
Mm-hmm.
an athlete, but it's like in the book, talk about like, oh, a small habit. It's like if you want to start a workout routine, you actually break it down. And the first habit you may do is you put your workout shoes, your running shoes right by your bed. So you get out of bed and you put
Right.
your shoes on right away. And so it's like all those tiny, when we're talking about, oh my gosh, I don't have time. Well, what we're doing is we want to start breaking it down and saying, okay, well, in prioritizing our relationship and prioritizing our sexuality and prioritizing ourselves and our partner, what are actually the tiny little things, the tiny little habits that we can do, right? Is it that you have an alarm on your phone once a week at whatever time that reminds you, like, hey, today I'm going to put on those sexy
Mm-hmm.
panties or whatever it is? Like, so the habit is not wear the sexy panties once a week for my partner. The habit is put the alarm
Right.
on the phone. So I'm
Right.
triggered to do that. And then this is something I do
Right.
without thinking about it. And that's how we start building it in, where it starts becoming part of our life instead of like, oh my gosh, I'm so busy and it's just one
Yeah.
extra thing.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. And I also want to kind of mention that it's going to be different things for each person, right? And so that's part of
Yeah.
your work, if you're listening, is to figure out, is it the heels and the sexy panties? Is it playing with your new sex toy and having some solo sex? Is it, going out and flirting with someone, even if you have no intention of it going anywhere, or taking a dance class, So there's so many different things. And like that is part of the work to figure out what are your things, see if you can have a handful. See if you can come up with 4 or 5
Yeah.
things that are like, oh, this kind of just makes me feel myself a little bit more, or this makes me a little more confident with my partner.
Yeah, I have a class coming up next week. I'm teaching, well, next week from
Mm-hmm.
this recording. It'll be already recorded by the time this goes live, but called Are You Having the Right Kind of
Ooh,
Sex? And it's basically exactly that whole concept you're talking about. Is I think part of our problem that we get into culturally and societally is like we have one version of what is displayed in the media
yes.
of this is what
Thank
it
you.
look like,
Yes.
right? And it's like, okay, so yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Like I'm giving
Mm-hmm.
examples, but it's a really important thing you brought up because that the examples might resonate with one person, but if it doesn't resonate with you, okay, that's your pleasure body
Right.
talking. And what does your pleasure body? And like the right kind of sex is the kind of sex that your pleasure body enjoys, is the kind of sex that your partner's pleasure body enjoys, and that's the kind of sex that you can come together and do
Yeah.
together. And that's it. So that's something that I feel like the exploration that we get to help our clients with is more around like being open to
Mm-hmm.
try things, and how do you go about trying things, and how do you get out of, hey, it's supposed to look like just what we
Yeah.
saw on, that
Right.
hot movie or whatever. It's around like, well, that might feel good to that person or that person
Mm-hmm.
over there. Beautiful. But just like we have so many different tastes about everything else in life, so does our pleasure
I
body.
appreciate, first of all, I love the term pleasure body. Like, yes, let's talk about that more. And also, I appreciate what you're
Yeah.
saying because, so many of my clientele, myself included, identify as either, kinky or queer or non monogamous. And sometimes we're not seeing, those depictions anywhere. And so, to realize like for you and, if you're someone who's trans, it might be like wearing a binder or, packing or, if you're somebody who's kinky, it might be like, okay, how can I have some kind of subversive pleasure that is maybe, going against gender norms or leaning into them in some way that like, I don't even believe in my daily life, And so I think there's so many really unique ways to kind of light up that pleasure body. And so if you're listening and you're not seeing that, just know that like you do you, like there's infinite ways and no two sexualities are totally alike. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So how did you come
100%.
up with this pleasure
Yeah,
body term? I love this.
this is I can't own this. This is actually mostly through when my dance
Oh,
teacher Liz Janowski. She's like this amazing dance teacher. I started in like S Factor style dance classes. Sheila Kelly's work around pole dancing and around Sheila Kelly's work is about the different archetypes of a sexual body. And so just like we have, blueprint styles and different archetypal models of all different personality types and sexual types and whatnot, this is more like the sensual sexual archetypes of the focused on the female. And so essentially, then from that standpoint, in doing these various different types of classes, you might show up one day and be like, okay, today I'm going to dance from this place of the dangerous challenger is what one of them's called. And so the dangerous challenger has all these like personality types. And maybe this is not the personality types and the sexual types that one might naturally go to, but you kind of try it on in context of these classes to be like, how does this feel? And so we talk about pleasure body and some of those. And then the work I did with Liz for many years was really then about taking some of those concepts, but almost going down into very different, like more emotional types of things. So, for example, like the book Existential Kink.
Have you ever read that book? Right here. I'm reading it now. Yeah.
I love it. It's like, and that book is so cool because it really does bring up these patterns, right, that we can't get out of. And it's like, maybe we can't get out of these patterns because we have some sort of like kink, we have some sort of draw to whatever that story is that we repeat in ourselves. And so in the concept of these classes, one of the things we've done is we've taken books like that, and then we've gone through our own exploration around like, okay, what patterns am I stuck in? What are my existential kinks? And then where are those patterns kind of like holding in my nervous system? And then through dance and through movement and through kind of some guided cues, we actually dance and move from the different emotional kinks that we are housing in our body. And sometimes sometimes the discovery is like, oh, there's this release where like that actually was like maybe something that I was holding on to from a pleasure kink perspective that isn't serving me anymore, but it's playing out subconsciously until I can actually move that, that story. And it's interesting because I would go through, and I'm not really doing these classes so much anymore, but in these classes, I would often go through these journeys, like with that book with 12 women. And so then you have other people that are witnessing and seeing your body move, like, oh, I'm feeling this thing, my body's moving in this way. And then you can actually get that feedback from others as you process through things. So it's just a very different way of experiencing, like, and so that's kind of like the existential kink is an example of the pleasure body, right? It's like, okay, we have this kink of whatever sort of emotional, whatever sort of thought pattern that we're almost continually thinking and creating our reality around. And that's because on some level, there's a kink, there's a pleasure. It's in our pleasure body. Whether or not it's serving us or not, there still might be something that it's like actually doing that our pleasure body is enjoying.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is so important to do. I love the existential kink approach because I think it's kind of like a fun way to do shadow work. It's kind of like, okay, I keep feeling really, like it's a struggle with money, or I keep feeling like, I picked the wrong lovers, or I keep feeling like, I'm battling the same health issues. And it's kind of like, whatever is a repetitive pattern for you, like this is worth exploring and seeing, like, is there some kind of hidden secret part of you that's just like thrilled with these things. And that's kind of what I love about, sexual kink too. It's like taking this subversive pleasure and like allowing parts of yourself that would often get exiled, which I also think can be part of libido issues. It's like if we have conflict about our own sexuality, whether it's, fantasies or attractions that we have, or thinking our libido is too high even. I've seen people in that camp who are just like kind of trying to compartmentalize and shut things down. But what are some common patterns that you see with people when it comes to libido and maybe what shuts it down or even turns it up too much?
Yeah, I mean, the super basic thing that we have to name, but then we also have to not get
Okay.
stuck here, I feel like, is stress,
Yeah.
right? So like the obvious thing is like stress, and that plays. And for most people, I feel like that puts kind of like the brakes on, but for some people it does actually rev up the libido. And so that's the obvious thing. I bring up and I see safety,
Huge.
and safety
Yeah.
is huge, right? And this can be from as simple as, hey, I don't like, obviously, if we don't actually feel physically or sexually safe at all, from a standpoint of more trauma or
Mm-hmm.
more abuse, that's one thing, very obvious. But the other kind of, components of safety that I think are sometimes more below the surface are things more around like, wow, we had this, this discussion, and I felt like you snapped at me when I was feeling like I was being very
Yeah.
vulnerable. And so now I'm feeling unsafe,
Yeah.
right? So it can be those things that oftentimes we brush around along the rug. Shame, some of what I hear when you're bringing up around like, oh, the exploration of like almost the shadow sides or the things we get to explore with kink. One of the things there, I think, is connected to
Yeah.
shame around having certain thoughts or
Mm-hmm.
desires. And sometimes then if we don't feel safe in sharing those with our partner, we see almost that shame safety pendulum where it's like, okay, well, I'm a little bit, maybe feel a little shame about like this fantasy, but I also want to try it, but I don't
Yeah.
feel safe, with my partner to share this. And then it can turn into even more
Mm-hmm.
self-shame, and we can get into that
Yeah.
vicious cycle. So I think those are, some of the big things. Obviously, having the right kind of sex, the wrong kind of sex. I think another huge thing is just not even knowing ourselves and what to ask for.
Yes.
And I think this all back to, the cultural things around sex and around self pleasure and self exploration and all those things. There's just so much stigma, and so many people I find are like, okay, well, I want to try something
Mm-hmm.
more novel. Like I want to mix it up. I want to bring that newness into my relationship, but like I don't even know what to ask for. I don't know where to start because it's like there's just, where do you even begin, because it's so hard to
Right.
find education
It
around
is.
these
So, like,
things.
where do you recommend people start who are in that camp of like, hey, okay, maybe I don't know myself as well and I'm not able to communicate what I want because I haven't done that exploration? Like, how do they start exploring, or where do they start looking?
It really, I think, depends upon a lot of different things. I think sexual orientation is a big thing. I think gender identity is a big
Mm-hmm.
thing. I think religious beliefs are a
Mm-hmm.
big thing. So I think the answer to that is very dependent upon all of those
Mm-hmm.
factors. And it's going to be different for everybody. And it's going to be different at the level people are at. So I tend to, in my work, my focus is on long-term monogamous couples or people that are looking for
Mm-hmm.
that kind of relationship. So that's my orientation. So somebody that identifies as more of gender neutral or trans, I'm probably not going to be the expert for them because I'm not an
Mm-hmm.
expert in those areas. So finding, first of all, finding somebody that is an expert in whatever, your unique situation is, I think, is really important. But I do think then starting oftentimes with wherever you're at, and I think some of it is just as simple, if you are in a partnership or partnerships, then it can be as simple as doing exercises. Like one of my favorite exercises to give people that do have another, person or persons in their life to explore with, is to say, okay, well, have your fun and just pay attention as you're going about it to the details of what you're
Hmm.
enjoying. It's like you're enjoying, hey, hand on my hip here, but hand on my hip there,
Mm-hmm.
not so much. Just pay attention to those nuances, and then not immediately after, but because usually we're in that moment. But as soon as you get a moment, then try to go back and journal as specifically as we can around like, okay, this is the thing that actually felt better than that thing. And so we actually start, because so many times if we're not writing this down, we can kind of lose track of it. And then if we do that a few times, you can kind of see patterns as you read. And then it becomes, okay, well, what if you're open to, depending upon religious beliefs and everything, but if you're open to masturbation and self-discovery, then it's like, okay, well, in these areas of my body that I'm discovering, what happens if I explore with myself in those areas? And how does that feel? And so that, that can be a useful exercise. And then depending upon the safety and where we are at with communicating with, with our lovers or lover in our life, then we can come back and say, okay, well, how does it feel if we are actually talking to them and be like, that thing, like, I really like if you do this and I want to build
Oh, I
upon
love
that.
that.
What other ideas can we build
That's
upon
great
that
phrasing
sort of
too.
thing that
People
I
should
already
steal that.
Yeah.
I really love this
Yeah.
and I
When
want
it
to
comes
build
to
on it.
talking
Yeah.
stuff, linguistics are really
Yeah.
important, right?
It is that, and it's just, yeah, when we can
Yeah.
frame things in sort of a fun, enthusiastic way, and I really
Yeah.
think talking about sex with a partner can be such great foreplay. I think that like mental foreplay is often missing, but just to kind of get excited about ideas. Um,
Yeah, exactly. And when, it's like, text flirting and text talking, those things
mhm.
are great, but think about how much it adds, for our listeners, like how much does it add when we're really
Yeah.
specific, when we're able to say like, hey, this one thing, like, oh my gosh, this one thing, it was driving me crazy. I keep, wondering like what we can do to just like make that thing even more crazy and grow even
Yeah.
more. And like, when we're like that, like I can even feel that in my body. I get a little goosebumps when I
Yeah.
say it like that, because when we're specific like that, it puts the other person there visualizing it
Mhm.
now versus like, hey, you're so sexy, I can't wait to, do our thing later. It's very, very different than being extremely specific about what we are actually
Yeah.
turned on about.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And I couldn't agree more. Like if I receive like a specific text that's like, oh, I just thought about me doing blah, blah, blah to you, or I just thought about you doing this while I'm doing, and I'm like, oh, and it does, it really kind of creates that like mental excitement that I think is often the missing factor, like people might be like, oh yeah, well, I mean, we did the kissing and we did the oral sex and I just wasn't into it. And I'm like, well, if you weren't in the right mood to start and you're like doing it for the other person, that could explain why. So figure out your mental turn on too. Um,
Yes.
so, okay, I wanted to ask you about, we've kind of gotten into novelty a little bit as we're starting to talk about this, but can you talk about the importance of novelty in a sexual relationship, especially when it is like a long-term monogamous relationship?
Yeah, the idea of novelty is connected to our brain
Mm-hmm.
chemistry, right? And so much desire is about the brain, and turn on is about the brain, and all the benefits of that come from sexuality. Not all, but a lot of them are connected to our brain and our brain chemistry. So when we are in that newness, right? So novelty is easy to think about from like the newness of an early
Yeah.
relationship. And everybody knows that feeling of like, can't stop thinking about that person. Are they going to call? And are they going to
Yeah.
text? And what are we going to
You're
see each
basically
other
just
again? And
like
all
on
things, right?
internal drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You absolutely are. And then my main one, the top one, is
Mm-hmm.
dopamine. And so dopamine, that pleasure hormone, like we think of dopamine oftentimes as like the
Yeah.
reward hormone, and it is, but it's also motivation and drive. So we increase dopamine. Not only do we, when we get the thing that we want, right? It's like, oh, we've been wanting chocolate cake, we've been wanting sex, we get to have sex, we get to have chocolate cake, we get dopamine. But another huge thing that increases dopamine is that space.
Hmm.
So if I have space between now and when I'm going to have my
Mm-hmm.
favorite food, now and when I'm with my friends, now and when I'm going to see my partner, when I have space, there's that longing and that space of I want something, I can't have it yet. That motivation towards that actually increases
Interesting.
dopamine. So that desire, that drive, that motivation is all dopamine. Dopamine, it makes us happy, and then we get the thing, then we also get another hit of dopamine. So that's novelty, right? That's that beginning of the relationship, that newness. One of the reasons why it tends to wear out is all of a sudden we start seeing somebody we care about more and more and more frequent. There's less space, there's more
Mm-hmm.
reliability. For many people, they move in together, then there's less space, and you're going to see them at the end of every day, most days. You're going to see them at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
of most days, those kind of things. Now, there's not that space to drive that
Right.
dopamine. So initially, space is actually a huge way of how we create
Okay.
novelty. It's not the only thing, right? It can still be that
Mm-hmm.
anticipation, but we don't know this, so we don't use this. And this is where, the talking, the flirting, the new thing, the kink,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, even it's like is as simple as like creating desire by putting on a new outfit or a wig, or creating a desire through bondage,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever your thing is, right? Whatever it is, the whole concept of novelty in longer term relationships, monogamous and otherwise, like it's a little bit easier oftentimes from a more of a polyamorous type of, or a
Yeah.
swinger type of open relationship, to
Right.
create that. And that is one of those things with some of those relationships, is like it naturally
Mm-hmm.
has that built in, right? But for those that choose a monogamous relationship, there is oftentimes that extra focus to say, okay, well, what can we say if it's Friday date night? What are we doing on Friday date night that's going to bring a level of
Yeah.
novelty, of this newness? And I tend to say, for people that are in these longer term monogamous relationships, it's people, places, and things are like the major category. So with monogamy, people are going to can be role playing. It can be, dressing up in some new outfit. It's like a new persona. You can read about the different archetypes that I'm talking about, say from like a S Factor, these other types of categories, and be like, today I'm going to I read about the
Yeah.
dangerous challenger. Today I'm going to dangerous challenger, right? So you can emulate that and then create that level of telling a partner okay, I'm today when you get home, or Friday when you're going to get home, even better, create that space. This is what's going to happen. And you can text from that dangerous
I
challenger mind,
love
kind of
this.
thing, to
It's
create,
like I'm huge on
right?
like building anticipation, and I think what you're describing is just like a really concrete way to do that, That's awesome.
Correct.
Everyone do this at home.
Yeah, and so that's that novelty. So that's kind of people. And then places are, the obvious thing, whether, you rather, or whether it's something like, oh, we're going to go to this, new, rent by the hour hotel. And if anybody's never done that, you can find a lot of classy
Oh,
places that do
really?
that. It's like really nice.
Huh.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of really popular hotels will rent rooms by the hour for like business people. And
Oh,
you can go rent rooms so it doesn't have to be like a sleazy,
interesting.
yeah. So that's a really fun way to just be like, okay, lunch date, we're gonna, meet at this hotel and rent a
Huh.
room for an hour, and that creates an element of
Yeah.
novelty, and then other places have you guys been intimate in every room of
Hmm.
your house? Have you had sex in the
Mm-hmm.
closet, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
places. And then things are, anything like toys, anything else that will bring more of a physical object. It could be food, it could be ice, it could
Yeah.
be some bondage
So
thing,
many
it could
options.
be
Yeah.
anything, right? So many options. But those are kind of I like to give people concrete categories. And obviously, we could think about a lot of other ways beyond
Yeah.
this to create that. I feel like people, places, and things, when I've tried to categorize things around how to get people to in that mode of how do I even begin to be creative, right? Like, okay, how could I create a different persona? How could I be in a different place
Mm-hmm.
or location? How could I bring a different object? And those are three concrete places of to try. And then, like you said, like that anticipation, build that in, flirt
Mm-hmm.
around it, create the distance, create the space. So you're thinking about it, you're talking about it,
Yep.
you're building that dopamine back into your
Yeah, I
relationship.
love this. And I love that your perspective is informed by like being a naturopath, your own personal lived experiences, studying the stuff with like S Factor and everything. So I'm excited for people to benefit from your wealth of knowledge. So if
Oh,
people are curious, like, okay, how can I work with Dr. Diane? How can I reach out to her? What are the offerings and how can people find you?
yeah, super simple thing is go take my libido quiz. So it's just
Oh,
libidoquiz.com.
great
Easy
URL.
peasy. And yeah, really excited when that was
Yeah.
available. So yeah, so libidoquiz.com. If you go there, it'll give you some of the point of the quiz is to elicit some of the top root causes from a physical perspective. It's focused on the physical, but so many people, like I said, just think it's hormones. If you take that quiz, it might pop up around actually it's more likely that you're not getting enough blood flow,
Hmm.
which is also true for females, and not just people that are born with male
Mm-hmm.
body parts, right? So essentially, from that standpoint, if you go take the libido quiz, you'll get not only ideas, but solutions that'll pop out for you as well around like, oh, make sure to ask about these labs.
Okay.
Here's access where you can
I
get
love
labs, all
that.
those kind of things. So it's a guided way of helping you make sure you're not missing any
Nice.
gaps.
Okay. Well, we'll be sure to
Yeah.
link to that in the show notes too, but libidoquiz.com.
Yeah, super easy. And then my website, my focus really is on education. So working with me is largely from an educational standpoint. So the phrase you find on my website is the sex education we all want, but none of us got. And so it's really a lot of, these kind of conversations around how do we start to have that difficult conversation with our partner? How do we actually have that insight onto what our own sexual needs, desires, preferences, and dislikes,
Yeah.
are? What happens if we're like having pelvic floor
Yes.
tension and it hurts? Like, where do we begin? Like all of these types of, topics. And then I'm constantly taking feedback and cues from all of my community members. So if people are like, oh, we need this topic in the platform, I want to hear about it. I'm always interested in creating what my community
Love
needs.
it.
So that's that. You can my main website, which is MyLibidoDoc.com.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Diane. And thank you everyone for listening. This was, I learned a couple things. I feel like I'm going to steal a couple concepts and the pleasure body and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will catch you next Monday. Bye.